About a rare win for conservatism and for conservative principles and limited government principles in the Idaho legislature. It's been an interesting week. As my friend Dustin Hurst has put it, he says, in 15 years of covering this, he says, I don't think I've seen a more liberal session of the Idaho legislature. But conservatism won out. We'll tell you all about it coming up next.
Bias, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.
Once again, welcome to Nowhere to Hide. I know we always hear political things described in terms of wins and losses. Somebody's got to win, somebody's got to lose. And yet, if we really were to get down to it, why do we have government in the first place? Is it so we can have some kind of an exciting contest back and forth? Really, it's because we need, in governance, someone to be careful about those things that we, pool our resources and our effort and energy and, yes, authority to act on certain issues to make sure that it's being used correctly. In other words, it's not a blank check, but for some people, that's how it's seen. And these are very small wins, I guess. And I'm going to give you an example of a small win in the Idaho legislature this week. But before we go there, first, I want to kind of set the mindset that many people approach when they approach problems with when they get into government. This says, government, if you think the problems we create are bad, just wait till you see our solutions. You want to see what one of those solutions looks like? Here you go. This was the concept that was narrowly defeated just yesterday in the Idaho legislature. Yeah, look at that cute little guy holding his very own EBT card. Now, there's probably some well-intended stuff that's going on here, but apparently under COVID, the Biden administration put together an EBT. It's welfare. It's food stamps basically on a credit card kind of thing, but they extended it to kids. And what Idaho's legislature was given the opportunity to do yesterday was to make that permanent. In other words, to accept that federal money with the attached strings. And it was defeated. And as you can probably guess, it made some people very, very upset. So let's take a moment here to break down why would they want to kill this. And actually, I'm going to turn to my friend Brian Allman, who is, I think, one of the most valuable sources for knowing what's going on in the legislature. If you're not subscribing to the Gem State Chronicle, or if you're not subscribing to Brian's Gem State Substack, you are missing out on his reports. Follow him on X. He's also got some wonderful up-to-the-minute reports on what's happening in the legislature. So here's the story about the Senate killing the summer EBT bill. This was a summertime program. Kids who aren't getting, for instance, lunches or breakfast at school, well, this was supposed to help them. But does anybody stop to ask, is this something government should be doing in the first place? I know Brian Allman does, and apparently there are a few legislators who do, but here's how he explains it. He says, it's bad enough that our lawmakers can't rein in entitlement programs, but they also seem determined to create new ones as well. For decades, the federal government has subsidized school lunches for families under a certain income threshold. And like most entitlement programs, that sounds reasonable and compassionate. After all, no one wants children to go hungry. Over the years, this program has been expanded to include breakfast during the school year and lunch during summer break. Now, when many schools closed during the pandemic lockdowns in 2020, Congress authorized direct payments to eligible families in the form of EBT cards. This was meant to be a temporary program, but this week your Idaho lawmakers were preparing this column was written in the previous week to make it a permanent program. So this is what was up for debate. A new federal regulation says that if 1 in 4 students in any particular school that is qualify for free or reduced lunch, then all the students in that school will be entitled to these EBT cards. Now, Brian asks, do you see what's going on? The Biden administration is further expanding the welfare state, and the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare is enthusiastically going along with it. So where are our fiscally conservative lawmakers to say stop? Idaho Department of Health and Welfare actually asked for an additional $1 million to support the summer EBT program. And of course, the Joint Finance Appropriations Committee voted to approve that appropriation. Now, yesterday, it reached the Senate floor. And Brian says conservatives debated against the bill, warning about socialism and building dependence upon government handouts. Democrats debated for it, saying it was necessary to make sure tens of thousands of Idaho children had enough to eat. The question was, which way would the moderate Republicans fall? And that is a pretty serious question and a necessary one, considering Idaho's legislature and how many people in there identify as Republican but vote as something very different. Well, Senator Ben Adams had the privilege of voting first in the Senate due to his last name. He took advantage of it to compare the summer EBT program to Soviet ration cards in explaining his vote. Majority Leader Senator Kelly Anthon followed with a no vote as well, which was a bellwether as to how the rest of the chamber would go. It failed 10 to 25 and will be returned to JFAC, where the summer EBT program will be stripped from the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare budget. Now, Brian goes on to say, this small victory is a reminder that nothing is inevitable. The forces of socialism and big government are not omnipotent, and those of us who believe in fiscal conservatism and self-reliance are not all helpless. All those letters, emails, and phone calls to your legislators actually matter. Also, electing good people who can lead on controversial issues matters. So again, this may seem like a small thing, but it adds up to a step in the right direction. Now, Senator Glenita Zuiderveld summed up the debate as well, saying government was never meant to be a charity. Rolling back entitlements and welfare programs is difficult, but it's not impossible. We can return our state government, that is, to its proper role, but it's going to take a lot of time and hard work. She says, take a moment to be inspired by today's vote and know that our work is not in vain. Now, she's one of those stalwarts who is standing for principle rather than just what's pragmatic or what's going to get me votes. And that makes her kind of an enemy to those who want to, keep the state growing and keep the dependency growing. After all, there's job security, right? The more people who are depending on you, the more people who are likely to vote for you when push comes to shove. But thank goodness we have some good people standing in the gap. Oh, I should also give a nod to us here. He says, we killed this bill dead today. Now, he's talking about yesterday when they voted on it. Why? Because he says we're aiming for self-reliance, not a lifetime subscription to the welfare buffet. I like that he can do it and keep a sense of humor while doing it at the same time. So here are some of the predictable headlines that have followed. And as you may guess, they cover this in the most dire terms possible. What's this from Idaho Education News? Idaho lawmakers Thursday rejected $16.3 million from a federal program that offers low-income children lunch money during summer months. Again, on the surface, wow, what's wrong with offering these children lunch money, especially if they're in a low-income situation? But look at the bigger picture. In fact, if you really want to have a better understanding of why it's important to consider the unintended consequences that may come from bills like this, I would encourage you to look up an essay by Frederick Bastiat, Bastiat, Bastiat. It's called That Which Is Seen and That Which Is Not Seen. And considering this was written before 1850, I think it was published actually in 1850. And, you may think, well, it has nothing to do with us today, but it does, because it gets to the heart of what good government is about and what good, I'll use the term economist, but good citizens, good policymakers, they need to look not only at the desired immediate effect, well, this will put money in the hands of these kids who could use it to buy food during the summer break. That's great, but what's the unintended consequence? See, I'm looking at it from the standpoint of what is it teaching these kids? That, prosperity is something that comes to you on a card handed to you by government. I think maybe I'm overstating this, and maybe I'm being a little harsh, but could it be that they're trying to train them, groom them, if you will, to be receptive to those benefits to the point that they can't imagine life without it? Just a thought. Here's another headline. This one is from the Idaho Statesman. See if it'll pull up here. There we go. A dark day for Idaho kids. Whoop, go back. I've got another headline here that I'll share with you in a second. This is the one. A dark day for Idaho kids. Republicans reject $16 million to feed children over the summer. A dark day for Idaho kids. That more people didn't add to the welfare burden already being borne by the taxpayers. Yeah, I know. Look, seeing kids hungry, that's a scary prospect. But again, it's not government's job to fix that. That is something that should be fixed through local charity, through churches, through family, if possible. And trying to create a program that becomes more or less permanent, not a good idea. Now, I'm going to share a couple other headlines with you here in just a moment. This is just in relation. We touched on this in the last program on Wednesday. And of course, maybe you've heard a little bit about this incredible brouhaha. There's hardly a political leader in the state of Idaho, with the exception of those who actually have principles, who hasn't been clamoring to get in front of a TV camera to talk about how racism is bad because there was an alleged incident that took place in Coeur d'Alene. Now, I say alleged because really, other than someone made a phone call to the police, and apparently this guy, the guy who made the phone call is a professor emeritus for the University of Utah, had some pretty nasty things to say about all those white trash hillbilly, inbred types from northern Idaho. Clearly, he had a bone to pick. But as far as actual proof, video, eyewitness accounts, anything like that, the story says that apparently one or two vehicles yelled racial slurs at some of the NCAA women basketball players from University of Utah who were staying in Coeur d'Alene. Now, if someone did that, that's a pretty disagreeable, it's an ugly thing to do, and no one is supporting that. But there's this litmus test and this struggle session that's been called for everybody. I mean, they locked up the senators yesterday and made them stay until they could vote on a Senate resolution talking about how we have to get Hyde out of the great state of Idaho. And it's like, yeah, you're going to change guys' hearts. You're going to change people's minds with words on paper. No, you're not. And besides, it's shameless virtue signaling. Actually, Senator Brian Lenny had his own response, which I thought was really appropriate. But because people pushed back and said, are we sure we're even talking about something that actually happened? In other words, nobody's saying, hey, if it did happen, it was a good thing. We're just saying, are we sure it happened in the first place? And this attitude of, well, it doesn't matter if it happened or not. You should be stepping up and denouncing it. Does that sound like a healthy mindset to you? Does that sound like something a healthy society would embrace? As long as the accusation's there, everybody has to step up and denounce it. That sounds like the kind of heel-clicking stuff that, I don't know, got Germany in trouble a while back. And it sounds like the nobody dares stop clapping first when Stalin's around because they don't want to be seen as less than the most enthusiastic supporter. I'm not sure how Mao would have handled it, but since he was one of the guys who really liked to push those struggle sessions, I'm sure that this would be fitting. So here are two headlines from the Idaho Statesman. And I guess they are really feeling like this is the time to press. They must sense that there must be some blood in the water. Look at this. Idaho far-right figures cast doubt on reports of racial harassment in Coeur d'Alene. Followed by Idaho far-right lawmakers flinch at condemning racism in Coeur d'Alene incident. Now, actually, that last one's kind of a big fat lie because there were individuals. In fact, I think Brent Regan from the Kootenai County Republican Central Committee put up $10,000 if someone will come forward with information leading to the arrest and conviction of whoever perpetrated what people are calling a hate crime. Look, this is not a defense of boorish behavior or treating people poorly. I think we should all abide by the golden rule. But this is a very strong cautionary warning about when someone comes by and says, hey, you have to jump on the bandwagon, you have to start reciting things and chanting in unison with us. You should probably think twice before you do, because that is not, uniformity of thought is not synonymous with a free society. That's more what dictatorships thrive on, and that seems to be what they are pushing for in terms of thought. And I'm going to give you just some wonderful advice from a writer by the name of AJK, since this is happening in other places besides just Idaho. But right now the race hustlers, as they were, the people who thrive on identifying people who aren't thinking correctly, or at least thinking thoughts that agree with theirs, they're having a heyday. They are absolutely besides themselves. And it's kind of entertaining to watch, but at the same time, you have to remember, these are people who are trying very hard to get their hands on the levers of power. If they had their hands on that power, I have no doubt there would be some mandated struggle sessions we'd all be invited to, whether we like it or not. So what do you do about it? Well, AJK reminds us that the only thing that makes you a racist is being a racist. And the actual litmus test for racism is whether you harbor prejudice on the color or on the basis of skin color. Plain and simple. These fake litmus tests, like, have you denounced it enough? Have you denounced it thoroughly? That's just a tactic for inducing self-censorship that weaponizes your fear of criticism, no matter how baseless. Sadly, many Idaho legislators, at least senators, failed that test. Now, if you want to become impervious to this strategy, in other words, if you want to become less manipulable, here are two things you need to do. Number one, know yourself. Number two, be brave. You don't have to censor yourself. I know I have not been following the Idaho legislature as long as Dustin has, because I just moved back to the Gem State after being away for quite a few years, and I've only been back for 3 years. But I have to admit, the folks who are on the left, and that includes quite a few Republicans who, well, I'm a Republican, sure you can trust me, but they govern like leftists. They are desperate. Why is that? Do they feel like the people are catching on to their charade, that they're being caught talking out of both sides of their mouths? I don't know what it is, but the desperation is coming through. And I'm kind of glad because it's revealing them for who they are, but it's also showing the importance of each one of us carefully thinking about what comes to us through legacy media or comes to us even through political channels or through social media, and to take seriously how involved we are in our civic duties. So if you're thinking about attending your precinct's meetings and electing precinct chairman and so forth, probably a good idea. This would be a year to do it because there are people who feel like power is slipping through their fingers. And these are not the kind of people that you would want to have power in the first place. I know, they're already there. And some of them include old familiar names. Why, they've been here for generations. But that doesn't mean they have your best interest at heart. Thanks again for joining us. This is Nowhere to Hide.
Bias, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
Indoctrination.
That's right.
Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot.
That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy in our state.